The laughter reached Anwen before the carriage did, spilling through the open windows of Hallworth House like poison poured into clean water. She recognized that laugh, feminine, musical, deliberately loud. Her hand stilled on the embroidery frame, needle suspended mid-stitch, as the front doors crashed open and her husband's voice echoed through the marble foyer. "Prepare the rose suite," Aldrich commanded, his boots striking the floor with the authority of a man who owned everything he surveyed, including her. "My guest will be staying indefinitely." Anwen set aside her needlework with careful precision, smoothing her dove-gray dress with palms that refused to tremble. She was 19 years old, had been married for 2 years and 43 days, and she had learned that trembling only encouraged him. She descended the main staircase with measured steps, each one bringing the scene in the foyer into sharper focus. Aldrich stood in the center of the hall, still wearing his traveling coat, his dark hair windswept from the journey. He was handsome in the way that blades were handsome, all cutting angles and cold blue eyes. Beside him stood a woman Anwen had never seen before, wrapped in emerald silk that cost more than the household's monthly budget. The woman was stunning. Golden hair piled artfully atop her head, eyes the color of warm honey, a figure that the emerald silk displayed with shameless intention. She looked at Anwen the way one might look at a piece of furniture that no longer matched the decor. "Ah, there she is." Aldrich's smile held no warmth. "Anwen, come meet Oriana. She'll be living with us from now on." The words landed like blows, each one precise and calculated. Living with us, not visiting, not staying briefly. Living. How lovely. Anwen heard her own voice, as if from a great distance, perfectly pleasant, perfectly empty. "Welcome to Hallworth House." Oriana's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Thank you, Lady Hallworth. Your husband has told me so much about you." Her gaze swept over Anwen's simple dress, her modest jewelry, her carefully arranged composure. Though I confess, he may have been generous in his descriptions. Aldrich laughed, that sharp bark that passed for amusement. "Oriana has a wicked tongue. You'll grow accustomed to it." Would she? Anwen wondered distantly. Would she grow accustomed to her husband installing his mistress in their home, to being compared unfavorably in her own foyer, to the slow suffocation of whatever remained of her dignity? "The rose suite," she said, because someone had to manage the practical details while her world collapsed. "I'll have the housekeeper prepare it immediately." "No need." Aldrich was already guiding Oriana toward the staircase. "She'll be in the east wing, adjacent to my chambers." Adjacent. The word hung in the air like smoke. Aldrich's chambers were in the east wing. Anwen's were in the west, had been since their wedding night, when he'd made it clear that her primary function was complete once she'd signed the marriage certificate and secured her father's debts. Of course, Anwen's voice didn't waver. She'd had 2 years of practice. "I'll inform the staff." She watched them ascend the stairs, Oriana's hand resting possessively on Aldrich's arm, their laughter drifting back like mockery-made sound. Only when they disappeared from view did Anwen allow herself to close her eyes, just for a moment, just long enough to remember that she'd once been a girl who dreamed of love. That girl felt very far away now. "My lady." Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper, appeared at her elbow, her weathered face carefully neutral. "Shall I prepare the rose suite or the east wing chambers?" "The east wing, adjacent to Lord Hallworth's rooms." Something flickered in the older woman's eyes, pity or anger, but she merely nodded. "Very good, my lady." Anwen turned away, walking toward the morning room with steps that never faltered, a smile that never cracked. She would not break in the foyer. She would not give the servants gossip to spread. She would not let Aldrich win this small battle, even if he'd already won the war. The morning room was her sanctuary, a small space overlooking the gardens that Aldrich never entered, because he found flowers boring. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, finally allowing her mask to slip. Indefinitely. His mistress would be living here indefinitely. The sound that escaped her throat was not quite a sob, not quite a laugh. It was something broken in between, the noise of a woman who had run out of tears years ago. A knock at the door made her straighten instantly, mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "My lady." The butler's voice was muffled through the wood. "A visitor has arrived. The Duke of Vexley requests an audience with Lord Halworth." Anwen's brow furrowed. The Duke of Vexley? She'd never heard the name, and Aldrich rarely received visitors of such rank. He preferred his companions less respectable and more discreet. "Lord Halworth is occupied," she said, the word tasting bitter. "Please show his grace to the drawing room. I'll receive him until my husband is available." A pause. "Very good, my lady." Anwen pressed her hands to her cheeks, willing the flush of humiliation away. She had perhaps 60 seconds to transform from a woman whose husband had just installed his mistress in their home into a composed hostess receiving a duke. She could do this. She had survived worse, but when she entered the drawing room and saw the man standing by the window, something in her chest stuttered unexpectedly. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell across a forehead creased in apparent thought. When he turned, she saw eyes the color of aged whiskey, keen and assessing, and somehow warm beneath their intensity. He was not handsome in the way Aldrich was handsome. There was nothing cutting about him. He looked instead like something solid, something that might bear weight without breaking. "Lady Halworth." His voice was low, measured, with an undercurrent of something she couldn't identify. "I apologize for arriving unannounced." "Your Grace." She curtsied, grateful for the automatic movement that gave her time to compose herself. "My husband will be with you shortly. He's currently attending to a guest." Something flickered in those whiskey-colored eyes. He'd seen the carriage in the drive, she realized. Perhaps he'd even seen Oriana. "I'm in no hurry." He didn't sit, though she gestured toward the chairs. Instead, he studied her with an attention that felt almost physical. "I hope I haven't interrupted anything." The laugh that escaped her was not the one she intended. Too raw, too honest. "Nothing that wasn't already interrupted, Your Grace." His gaze sharpened. "Lady Halworth." The drawing room door burst open, and Aldrich strode in, his cravat hastily retied, his color high. Behind him, lingering in the doorway with a satisfied smile, stood Oriana. "Your Grace." Aldrich's bow was perfectly correct, but his eyes held none of the deference his posture suggested. "I apologize for keeping you waiting. I wasn't expecting such distinguished company." The Duke's expression didn't change, but Anwen noticed his attention shift to Oriana, then back to Aldrich, then briefly to her. Something passed across his features, there and gone, impossible to read. "Lord Halworth?" The Duke's voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. "We have business to discuss, regarding the Thornbrook estate." Aldrich's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Anwen, you may go." It was a dismissal, sharp and public. Anwen rose, preparing to retreat with what remained of her dignity. "Actually," the Duke's voice stopped her mid-step. "I'd prefer Lady Halworth to stay." The silence that followed was absolute. Aldrich's face went carefully blank, the expression he wore when something had caught him off guard. "I beg your pardon?" "My business involves the Thornbrook estate," the Duke said calmly. "Lady Halworth's family estate, if I'm not mistaken. It seems appropriate that she remain present." Anwen's heart hammered against her ribs. No one spoke to Aldrich like this. No one contradicted him in his own home, in front of his wife, in front of his mistress. She waited for the explosion, for the cold fury that would follow. Instead, Aldrich's smile widened into something that looked almost amused. "As you wish, Your Grace. Anwen, sit." She sat, because obedience was automatic and rebellion was dangerous. But as the Duke took his own seat, his eyes met hers across the room. And in that brief moment of contact, she saw something that made her breath catch. He saw her. Not through her. Not past her. He saw her. The Duke of Vexley, Anwen learned over the next quarter hour, was named Dacian Ashworth, and he had come to discuss a piece of land that bordered both the Thornbrook estate and Aldrich's holdings. It was tedious business, boundary disputes, and water rights, the sort of thing that made her father's eyes glaze over before he'd lost everything. But it was not the business that held Anwen's attention. It was the way the Duke watched Aldrich, with a stillness that seemed to catalog every sneer, every dismissive gesture, every time her husband spoke over her or around her, as if she were not present. "The stream cuts through the northwest corner," Aldrich was saying, spreading a map across the table between them. "Thornbrook has always claimed rights to it, but the documentation is questionable. The documentation is quite clear." The Duke's voice was mild, but something beneath it was not. "The stream belongs to Thornbrook. It has for 300 years. Thornbrook belongs to me now." Aldrich didn't look at Anwen as he said it, but she felt the words like a blade. "When I married, I assumed all rights to the estate and its holdings." "You assumed management of the estate," the Duke corrected. "Not ownership. There's a distinction." Aldrich's smile flickered. "A legal technicality." "The law is built on technicalities, Lord Hallworth." The Duke leaned back in his chair, every line of his body radiating quiet authority. "I'd recommend consulting a solicitor before making claims that might prove embarrassing." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Oriana, still lingering near the doorway, made a small sound of displeasure. Anwen kept her eyes fixed on her folded hands, but she felt the tension coiling in her husband, like a snake preparing to strike. "Perhaps," Aldrich said slowly, "we should continue this discussion another time. You've had a long journey, Your Grace. You'll stay for dinner, of course." It was not a question. It was Aldrich reasserting control, reminding everyone present that this was his house, his domain, his world. "I would be honored." The Duke's acceptance was equally calculated. "Lady Hallworth, will you be joining us?" Anwen looked up, startled. Aldrich often excluded her from dinners, especially when Oriana was present. She'd assumed tonight would be no different. "Of course she'll be joining us." Aldrich's voice was silky, dangerous. "My wife is an excellent hostess, aren't you, darling?" The endearment was a weapon. It always was. "I'll speak with Cook about the menu." Anwen rose, grateful for an excuse to escape the suffocating atmosphere. "If you'll excuse me, Your Grace." "Lady Hallworth," the Duke's voice caught her at the door. "I look forward to continuing our conversation at dinner." There was something in the way he said it, a weight beneath the polite words that made her pause. When she turned, his eyes held hers, with an intensity that felt almost like a promise. She didn't know what to do with that look. She didn't know what it meant. So she fled. The kitchens were her second sanctuary, where Mrs. Dalton, the cook, had known her since childhood. The woman pressed a cup of tea into her hands without a word. "The East Wing," Anwen said quietly, "adjacent to Lord Hallworth's chambers, and we'll need an extra place at dinner. The Duke of Vexley is staying." Mrs. Dalton's hand stilled. "Your father's lands. I remember when you used to play by that stream with your brother." The memory rose unbidden. Another world. "That was a long time ago," Anwen said. "Not so long that things can't change." But things couldn't change. Anwen had learned that lesson thoroughly in 2 years of marriage. She was bound to Aldrich by law, by contract, by her father's signature on documents she'd never been allowed to read. There was no divorce for women like her. There was no escape. There was only endurance. She dressed for dinner in her finest gown, a pale blue silk that Aldrich had purchased before their wedding, when he'd still been pretending. Her maid, Nell, arranged her dark hair in an elaborate style that made her look older, more sophisticated. "You look beautiful, my lady," Nell whispered. "Beautiful." Anwen stared at her reflection and saw only a painted cage. The dining room had been transformed in her absence, candles blazing, silver polished to mirror brightness. Aldrich sat at the head of the table, with Oriana positioned at his right hand, in the seat that should have been Anwen's. The Duke stood by the fireplace, a glass of wine in hand, his expression unreadable. "There she is." Aldrich's voice carried false warmth. "My lovely wife. Come, sit." He gestured to a chair at the far end of the table, as distant from him as possible, while still being technically present. Anwen took her place without protest, but then the Duke moved. He crossed the room with deliberate steps, bypassing the seat that had been set for him, the one beside Oriana. Instead, he pulled out the chair directly across from Anwen and sat down, placing himself squarely between the married couple. "I hope you don't mind," he said, his voice carrying easily down the table. "I find the light better here." The light was identical everywhere in the room. Everyone knew it. No one said anything. Dinner was an exercise in subtle warfare. Oriana dominated the conversation, her voice pitched to Carrie, her every comment designed to remind Anwen of her displacement. She spoke of the plays she and Aldrich had attended in London, the parties, the delightful people they'd met. Of course, poor Anwen must find country life so dull, Oriana said, reaching for her wineglass with fingers that sparkled with new rings. "Stuck here alone while Aldrich was with me? I mean, in London." The slip was deliberate. The correction was worse. Anwen said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Lady Hallworth." The Duke's voice cut through Oriana's next comment. "I understand you're quite accomplished at the pianoforte. Your mother was known for her musical talents, I believe." Anwen blinked, surprised. "You knew my mother?" "My father spoke of her often. They were childhood friends, before she married your father and moved to Thornbrook. He always said she played like an angel." The warmth in his voice was genuine. Anwen felt something in her chest loosen, just slightly. "I inherited her love of music," she said softly. "Though not her talent, I'm afraid." "I doubt that very much." The Duke's eyes held hers across the table. "Perhaps you might play for us after dinner." "Anwen doesn't play anymore." Aldrich's voice sliced through the moment like a blade. "She lost interest after we married." It was a lie. She hadn't lost interest. She'd been forbidden. The pianoforte had been sold to pay for Oriana's jewels. But she couldn't say that. Not here. Not now. A pity. The Duke didn't look at Aldrich when he said it. He was looking at Anwen, and there was something in his gaze that felt like understanding, like recognition, like fury, carefully controlled. The meal continued, course after course, each one accompanied by Oriana's laughter and Aldrich's pointed commentary. By the time dessert arrived, Anwen's composure was fraying at the edges. "If you'll excuse me." She rose from her chair. "I'm feeling rather tired. The journey this morning must have exhausted me." She hadn't taken a journey. She hadn't left the house in weeks, but no one commented on the obvious lie. "Of course, darling." Aldrich's smile was sharp. "Run along to bed. Oriana and I will entertain our guest." She was halfway to the door when the Duke spoke. "Lord Hallworth." His voice stopped the room. "Before Lady Hallworth retires, I should mention something about the Thornbrook matter." Aldrich's expression flickered with impatience. "Yes?" "The estate's original deed contained a clause I discovered in the archives." The Duke set down his wineglass with deliberate care. "A reversion clause. If the estate passes to a husband through marriage, and that husband fails to maintain it according to specific standards, ownership reverts to the original family line. Silence fell like a hammer. "That's preposterous," Aldrich said, but his voice had lost its smooth certainty. "There's no such clause. I have the documentation with me. Perhaps we should examine it together." The Duke's smile was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. "Lady Hallworth, you may wish to stay for this conversation after all." Anwen stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. A reversion clause, a way to reclaim Thornbrook, a crack in the prison walls she'd believed were unbreakable. She turned slowly, meeting the Duke's eyes across the room. And in that moment, she understood that the Duke of Vexley had not come here for boundary disputes or water rights. He had come for something else entirely. The study was smaller than the drawing room, more intimate, lined with books that Aldrich never read. Anwen stood by the window while her husband examined the documents the Duke had produced, his face growing progressively paler with each page. Oriana had been dismissed, her protests silenced by a single look from Aldrich that promised consequences later. The woman had retreated to the east wing, her emerald silk trailing behind her like a serpent's skin. "This can't be legal." Aldrich threw the papers onto the desk. "My solicitor reviewed every document before the marriage. He would have found this." "Your solicitor," the Duke said calmly, "was paid to find what you wanted him to find. I employ a rather more thorough firm." The insult landed squarely. Aldrich's jaw tightened to granite. "What do you want, Vexley?" The pretense of civility had evaporated entirely. "You didn't come here to discuss water rights. What's your game?" "No game." The Duke moved to stand near Anwen, close enough that she could smell sandalwood and something warmer beneath it. "I came because I received a letter." Anwen's brow furrowed. "A letter?" "From your brother." The word hit her like a physical blow. Corwin. She hadn't seen her brother in 2 years. Not since Aldrich had forbidden all contact with her family. She'd written letters that went unanswered, sent messages that disappeared into silence. "My brother wrote to you." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "He's been trying to reach you for 18 months. The Duke's voice was gentle, but there was steel beneath it. Every letter intercepted, every messenger turned away. He finally reached out to me through a mutual acquaintance, hoping I might have some influence. Anwen's hands began to shake. Corwin had tried. He'd been trying all along. She hadn't been forgotten. She hadn't been abandoned. "This is absurd." Aldrich's laugh was brittle. "My wife's family is irrelevant. They lost their estate, their fortune, their standing. They have nothing to offer. They have her." The Duke's words fell into the room like stones into still water. "And I'm here to offer them an alternative." "An alternative to what?" "To this." The Duke gestured broadly, encompassing the room, the house, the marriage. "To a woman being treated as property. To her family's estate being stripped and sold. To your mistress parading through the halls while your wife is relegated to silence." Aldrich's face contorted with rage. "How dare you?" "I dare because I can." The Duke's voice didn't rise, but it filled the room with authority that Aldrich's bluster could never match. "I'm the Duke of Vexley. My family's influence predates yours by 3 centuries, and I've spent the last 6 months researching exactly how thoroughly you violated the terms of your marriage contract." The silence that followed was suffocating. Anwen couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. This man, this stranger, had spent 6 months investigating her husband, had been corresponding with her brother, had come here with documents and evidence, and something that looked terrifyingly like a plan. "What do you want?" Aldrich repeated, but his voice had lost its certainty. "I want Thornbrook returned to the Ashford family line. I want Lady Hallworth released from a marriage that has been, by any reasonable standard, fraudulent from its inception." The Duke paused. And I want your mistress removed from this house before nightfall tomorrow. You can't do this. I can. The Duke moved toward Aldrich with predatory grace. Your solicitor made errors in the marriage contract. The reversion clause alone gives me grounds to challenge the entire arrangement. Add to that the evidence of financial mismanagement, the sale of Lady Halworth's personal property without consent, the documented isolation from her family. He smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. I have enough to ruin you, Lord Halworth, completely and publicly. Anwen watched her husband's face cycle through fury, calculation, and finally something that looked like fear. She had never seen Aldrich afraid. She hadn't known he was capable of it. What's the alternative? Aldrich asked through clenched teeth. The alternative is simple. You grant Lady Halworth an annulment on grounds of non-consummation. Anwen's cheeks flamed. The Duke was stating, plainly and publicly, that her marriage had never been completed, that Aldrich had never touched her beyond the perfunctory kiss at their wedding ceremony. It was true, but to hear it spoken aloud. In exchange, the Duke continued, I'll allow you to retain a portion of the Thornbrook holdings, enough to maintain your current lifestyle, if somewhat reduced. Your reputation remains intact. Your mistress can stay, for all I care, once your wife is no longer obligated to share space with her. And my wife? Aldrich's voice dripped venom. What becomes of her in this arrangement of yours? The Duke turned to look at Anwen, and something in his expression made her heart stutter. Lady Halworth will be free, he said simply, to return to her brother, to rebuild her family's legacy, to live whatever life she chooses. Free. The word shimmered in the air like sunlight on water. No. Aldrich's voice cracked like a whip. Absolutely not. I don't care what documentation you found or what threats you make. Anwen is my wife. She belongs to me. She belongs to no one. The Duke's voice was ice. She is not property to be owned, regardless of what the law allows. The law allows plenty. Aldrich's smile returned, cruel and confident. She can't leave without my permission. She can't divorce without grounds I'll never provide. And annulment? He laughed. Who would believe it? A man doesn't marry a woman and leave her untouched for 2 years. You did. The Duke's voice was flat. Because you never wanted a wife. You wanted an estate. You wanted to eliminate her father's debts so you could seize his holdings. You wanted a hostess and a scapegoat and someone to blame for your failures. Aldrich's face purpled with rage. Get out of my house. Gladly. Once I have Lady Halworth's answer. Both men turned to look at her. Anwen stood by the window, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her entire future hung in the balance of whatever she said next. Your Grace. Her voice was steadier than she expected. Why would you do this? You don't know me. My brother and I have never met you. What possible reason could you have for involving yourself in my marriage? The Duke was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, stripped of its authority, almost vulnerable. My sister, he said. She was married at 16 to a man not unlike Lord Halworth, charming on the surface, cruel beneath. She wrote to me for help, but I was young, selfish, too caught up in my own concerns. I told her to be patient, to try harder, to make the best of her situation. His jaw tightened. She died 3 years later. Officially, it was a riding accident. Unofficially. He didn't finish. The silence in the room was absolute. When your brother's letter reached me, the Duke continued, I recognized the patterns, the isolation, the financial control, the public humiliation. I couldn't save my sister, but I could try to save you. Anwen's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. This man, this stranger with his whiskey-colored eyes and his quiet intensity, had come to rescue her because he couldn't rescue someone else. I'm not asking you to trust me, the Duke said. I'm asking you to trust yourself, to believe that you deserve better than this, to take a chance on freedom even if it's terrifying. And if I say no, her voice was barely a whisper, then I leave. The documents disappear. Your husband continues as before, and He paused. I live with another failure. Aldrich stepped between them, his face twisted with triumph. You heard him, Anwen. He can't force you, and you know what happens if you try to leave me. Your father will be thrown in debtor's prison. Your brother will lose what little he has left. Your mother, my mother is dead. Anwen's voice cut through his threats like a blade. She died 6 months after you married me. From heartbreak, the doctor said. From watching her daughter disappear into a marriage she tried to warn her against. Aldrich's face flickered with something that might have been surprise. He hadn't known. Of course he hadn't. He didn't care enough to know. I didn't know, he said, and for the first time he sounded almost human. Anwen, I'm sorry. Don't. She held up her hand. Don't pretend you care. Don't pretend anything between us has been real. She turned to the Duke, her decision crystallizing with sudden, terrifying clarity. If I agree to this, she said slowly, what guarantee do I have that you're not simply another version of him? Another man making promises he won't keep, offering freedom he'll revoke once I'm in his power. The Duke didn't flinch from her accusation. Instead, he reached into his coat and produced another set of documents. These are drawn up by my solicitor. They transfer ownership of Thornbrook entirely to your brother, regardless of the outcome of your situation. No strings, no conditions. The estate is his the moment he signs. He offered her the papers. I have no desire to own you or your family's legacy. I simply want to see you free of a man who never deserved you. Anwen took the documents with trembling hands. They were real, legal, binding, witnessed. Why? She asked again, because she still couldn't comprehend it. You could have anyone. You could have anything. Why this? Why me? The Duke's eyes met hers, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Because, he said quietly, some things are worth fighting for, even when they're not yours to keep. Aldrich laughed, harsh and ugly. How romantic. The Duke and the discarded wife. Do you think she'll fall into your arms out of gratitude? She's a cold fish. She couldn't keep a man's attention if her life depended on it. Enough, the Duke's voice cracked like thunder. One more word, Halworth, and I'll forget I'm trying to do this civilly. The threat hung in the air, sharp as steel. Anwen looked at her husband, at the man who had stolen her family's home, who had installed his mistress in her house, who had spent 2 years making her feel worthless and small. Then she looked at the Duke, at the man who had traveled here to help a stranger because he couldn't help his sister, who offered freedom without asking anything in return. The choice was terrifying. The choice was obvious. I accept your offer, your grace. Her voice rang clear and strong in the silent room. I want to be free. Aldrich's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful! The papers will be drawn up within the week. The Duke stepped forward, positioning himself between Anwen and her husband. Lady Holworth will remain here until the annulment is finalized. I'll have my solicitor correspond with yours. She's not staying here. Aldrich's voice was dangerous. Not after this betrayal. Then she'll come with me. The Duke's voice brooked no argument. To Vexley Manor, as my guest, under my protection, until her future is settled. Anwen's heart hammered. Leave tonight, with a man she'd just met. It was scandalous. It was dangerous. It was exactly what she wanted. I'll need to pack, she heard herself say. Take what's yours. The Duke's eyes were warm on her face. Leave everything he gave you. An hour later, Anwen stood in the foyer of Hallworth House with a single trunk containing her mother's jewelry, her father's books, and the blue dress she'd worn to her wedding. Everything else she left behind. Aldrich was nowhere to be seen. Oriana watched from the staircase, her beautiful face twisted with confusion and something that might have been envy. "You'll regret this," she called down. "He'll tire of you. Men always do." Anwen didn't respond. She walked through the front doors into the cool night air, where the Duke's carriage waited with its lanterns blazing. The Duke himself stood by the carriage door, his hand extended to help her up. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly. "Once you step into this carriage, everything changes." Anwen looked back at the house that had been her prison. Then she looked at the man offering her escape. "Everything already changed," she said, "the moment you walked through that door." She took his hand and climbed into the carriage. As it pulled away from Hallworth House, carrying her toward an unknown future, Anwen realized she was crying. Not from sadness, not from fear, from something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. But behind them, through the window, she glimpsed Aldrich standing in the doorway. His face was cast in shadow, but his posture radiated a promise. This wasn't over. The carriage moved through the darkness like a ship cutting through black water. Anwen sat with her back rigid against the velvet seat, acutely aware of the man across from her, his face illuminated in fragments by the passing lanterns. Neither of them had spoken since leaving Hallworth House. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had just occurred, and everything that remained unsaid. "You should sleep." The Duke's voice broke the quiet. "It's a 4-hour journey to Vexley Manor." "I couldn't possibly sleep." Anwen's hands twisted in her lap. Not with everything. Then talk to me." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, bringing his face closer to the lamplight. "Ask me whatever you're thinking. I can see the questions burning behind your eyes." She had 100 questions, 1,000. But one rose above all others. "Your sister," she said carefully. "You mentioned she died. What happened?" Pain crossed his features. "I failed her. She was in a dangerous marriage and wrote to me for help. I told her to be patient, to try harder." His voice roughened. "She died because I chose not to use the power I had to help her. I won't make that mistake again." Anwen felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry for me. Be certain that I mean what I say. When your brother's letter reached me, I recognized the same patterns. I couldn't save her, but I could try to save you. Is that why you're helping me? To atone?" "Partly." He didn't flinch from the honest question. "But also because it's the right thing to do. Because your brother's letter described a woman of intelligence and courage who deserved better than the cage she'd been locked in. Because when I walked into that drawing room and saw you standing there, composed and dignified despite everything, I knew the letter hadn't done you justice." Anwen's breath caught. No one had spoken to her like this in years. Perhaps no one had ever spoken to her like this. "I have conditions," she heard herself say. The Duke's eyebrow rose. "Conditions? If I'm to be your guest, if I'm to accept your help, I need to know exactly what you expect from me. What happens after the annulment? What obligations will I have? What price will I eventually pay?" Something that might have been admiration flickered in his eyes. "You've been hurt before. You're wise to be cautious. Answer the question, Your Grace." "Dacian." His voice softened. "If we're to be conspirators in this, you should use my name." "Answer the question, Dacian." The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken. "I expect nothing from you," he said. "Once the annulment is finalized, Thornbrook will belong to your brother. You'll be free to live with him, to find a position somewhere, to do whatever you choose. My involvement ends when your freedom begins. And if people talk, if they assume the worst about a woman who fled her husband to stay with an unmarried duke, let them talk His voice hardened. Anyone who matters will know the truth. Anyone who doesn't isn't worth your concern. Easy for you to say. You're a duke. Your reputation can weather scandal. Mine cannot. He was silent for a moment, considering. You're right. I spoke carelessly. He straightened in his seat. I'll ensure you have a proper chaperone at Vexley Manor. My aunt, Lady Heloise Ashworth, has been living with me since my mother's death. She's formidable and above reproach. Her presence will legitimize yours. And if your aunt objects to harboring a runaway wife? She won't? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She despised my sister's husband. She tried to warn my parents against the match. When she learns what I'm doing and why, she'll probably adopt you on the spot. Anwen wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust this man who spoke of redemption and offered freedom. But 2 years with Aldrich had taught her that charming words often concealed cruel intentions. One more condition, she said. Name it. If at any point I decide to leave, for any reason, you let me go. No arguments, no persuasion, no attempts to convince me otherwise. You simply provide me with transport and funds and allow me to disappear. The request hung in the air between them. It was unreasonable, perhaps even insulting, but it was also essential. Agreed. He said it without hesitation. On one condition of my own. Which is? Before you leave, you tell me why. Not to convince me or justify yourself. Simply so I understand what I did wrong. His eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity. I don't want to hurt you, Anwen, but I'm a flawed man, and I may do so inadvertently. If that happens, I'd like the chance to learn from my mistakes. It was the most reasonable thing anyone had ever asked of her. Agreed, she said quietly. Then we have a bargain. He extended his hand across the carriage. Partners in your liberation. She hesitated only a moment before clasping his fingers. His grip was warm, solid, reassuring in a way that made something inside her ache. Partners, she repeated. They released each other and settled back into their respective seats. The tension in the carriage had shifted, becoming something different. Not comfortable, exactly, but less adversarial. Try to sleep, Dacian said again. Tomorrow will be complicated. Because of your aunt? Because of everything. His expression grew serious. Aldrich won't accept this quietly. He'll fight the annulment. He may try to claim you abandoned him, or that you're mentally unstable, or any number of lies designed to preserve his control over Thornbrook. He'd rather destroy me than let me go. Yes, Dacian's voice was grim. Which is why we need to be prepared. My solicitor will begin building your case immediately. We'll need witnesses to his treatment of you, documentation of the financial irregularities, and testimony about Oriana's presence in your home. Mrs. Dalton would speak for me. She was our cook at Thornbrook before Aldrich took over. She's seen everything. Good. Write to her tomorrow. Invite her to Vexley under some pretext if necessary. He paused. Anyone else? Nell, my maid. And Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper. They've watched Aldrich humiliate me for 2 years. They might be willing to testify if they weren't afraid of losing their positions. I'll ensure they're protected. New positions, excellent references, whatever they need. Anwen stared at him. You'd do that? For servants you've never met? I'd do considerably more than that to see you free of him. His voice carried a weight that made her breath catch. Now please, rest. You look like you haven't slept properly in years. He wasn't wrong. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept without fear, without listening for footsteps in the hall, without wondering what fresh humiliation the morning would bring. Wake me when we arrive, she said, and allowed her eyes to close. She slept. Anwen woke to dawn breaking outside the window. Beyond the glass, rising from manicured grounds like something from a dream, stood Vexley Manor. It was magnificent. Honey-colored stone, towers at each corner, gardens stretching in every direction. "This is your home," her voice came out as a whisper. "This is your home now, for as long as you need it." The interior was overwhelming. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, portraits of stern-faced ancestors watching her passage. "Dacian," a voice echoed from the staircase. "What in heaven's name are you doing arriving at dawn?" The woman descending was perhaps 60, with silver hair and eyes the same amber color as the Duke's. She wore a burgundy dressing gown and radiated authority. "Aunt Heloise, I apologize for the disruption." "Who is this?" "Lady Anwen Hallworth. She'll be staying with us." "Lady Hallworth." Recognition shifted in Heloise's expression. "Lord Hallworth's wife. The girl married off to settle her father's debts." "You know of her?" "I know of everyone worth knowing." Heloise approached Anwen. "You look exhausted, underfed, and frightened. What has that monster done to you?" The unexpected kindness broke something loose. "He installed his mistress in our home yesterday," she heard herself say, "in the east wing, adjacent to his chambers." "The bastard." Heloise said it matter-of-factly, as if commenting on the weather. "I told Davinia Mountford that man was rotten when he first appeared in society." Did she listen? Of course not. No one ever listens to me until it's too late. "Aunt, hush, Dacian. The adults are talking." Heloise took Anwen's hands in her own, her grip surprisingly warm. "You're safe here, child. Whatever he's done, whatever you've endured, you're safe now. I'll tear apart anyone who tries to harm you." Anwen believed her. This woman with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue would absolutely tear apart anyone who crossed her. "Thank you," Anwen whispered. "I don't know how to thank me by eating breakfast and sleeping for the next 12 hours. You look like death warmed over." Heloise released her hands and clapped imperiously. "Mrs. Pemberton, prepare the blue suite immediately, and have cook send up a breakfast tray. Something substantial. The poor girl looks like she hasn't had a proper meal in months." A housekeeper materialized from somewhere, nodded, and vanished again. Heloise turned back to Dacian with a look that promised interrogation. "You'll explain everything over breakfast," she said. "And I do mean everything." "I intended to." She looked between them, her expression unreadable. "I assume there's a plan of some kind? You haven't simply kidnapped another man's wife on a whim?" "There's a plan. The annulment papers are being prepared as we speak." "Annulment." Heloise's eyebrows rose. "On what grounds?" "Non-consummation." Something flickered across the older woman's face, understanding mixed with pity. She looked at Anwen with new eyes. "I see," she said quietly. "Well then. The blue suite is definitely the right choice. It has the best light and the most comfortable bed." She squeezed Anwen's shoulder briefly. "Go. Rest. We'll handle everything else." Anwen allowed herself to be guided up the sweeping staircase by Mrs. Pemberton, too exhausted to absorb the splendor surrounding her. The blue suite turned out to be a series of rooms larger than the entire ground floor of her childhood home, decorated in shades of sapphire and cream that felt like stepping into the sea. A fire already blazed in the hearth. Fresh flowers adorned the mantel. The bed was a vast expanse of silk, and down that looked soft enough to drown in. "Is there anything else you need, my lady?" Mrs. Pemberton asked. Anwen shook her head, beyond words. When the door closed, leaving her alone in this impossible room, she walked to the window and looked out over gardens. She could now see clearly in the morning light. Roses and lavender and pathways, winding between hedges, shaped like animals. A fountain glittering in the distance. Beauty upon beauty upon beauty. She thought of Hallworth House, with its cold corridors and empty rooms, and the constant awareness of Aldrich's displeasure. She thought of her mother's cottage at Thornbrook, sold to pay debts she'd never incurred. She thought of the girl she'd been before her father's business failed, before the creditors came, before Aldrich appeared with his poisoned solution. That girl felt impossibly distant now, another person entirely. But perhaps she could find her way back to something like that girl. Perhaps in this house of warmth and unexpected kindness, she could remember who she'd been before everything broke. She climbed into the impossibly soft bed and slept without dreams for the first time in 2 years. Anwen woke to afternoon light. Someone had come in while she slept. Fresh clothes lay on a chair, a morning dress in soft green. She ate, washed, and dressed. The green dress fit perfectly. A knock at the door announced a young woman with dark curls and freckles. "You're awake. I'm Perpetua, but everyone calls me Pippa. I'm Dacian's cousin. Aunt Heloise sent me to fetch you for tea." "Tea?" "In the drawing room. Everyone wants to meet you properly." Pippa's smile was disarming. "Don't worry. Aunt Heloise already likes you. She told Cook you have excellent breeding and sensible eyes." The drawing room was intimate. Heloise sat by the window with embroidery, while Dacian stood by the fireplace. "Sit, child." Heloise set aside her work. "I have questions. Some are intrusive. You may refuse any you find offensive." Anwen sat. "Ask whatever you need to know." "Has your husband ever struck you?" The question landed like a stone. "No." Anwen heard her own voice as if from a distance. "He never hit me. His cruelty was different. Words instead of fists, humiliation instead of bruises. He made me feel worthless, invisible, less than human. But he never left marks that anyone could see." Heloise nodded slowly. "That kind of damage is harder to prove in court, but no less real. We'll need to document specific instances. Can you remember particular occasions?" "I remember all of them." The words came out harder than she intended. Every public dismissal, every private belittling, every time he looked through me like I wasn't there. I could write you a book. Then write one. Not literally, but record everything you remember. Dates, locations, witnesses if possible. The more detail, the better. Dacian spoke for the first time. "We should also discuss Oriana." The name tasted bitter. "What about her?" "How long have you known about her?" "I knew about her before we married." Anwen's hands tightened in her lap. Aldrich never tried to hide her existence. He simply didn't care that I knew. She was his passion, he said. I was his obligation. "And you married him anyway?" Pippa's voice held no judgment, only curiosity. "I didn't have a choice." Anwen met the girl's eyes directly. "My father owed Aldrich a great deal of money. Gambling debts, bad investments, loans that had come due all at once. Aldrich offered to forgive everything in exchange for my hand. If I refused, my father would go to debtor's prison. My mother would lose her home. My brother would be ruined before his life even began." "So you sacrificed yourself," Heloise said quietly. "I did what I had to do. I thought—" Her voice faltered. "I thought perhaps it wouldn't be so bad. I thought perhaps he might come to care for me in time. I was 17. I didn't understand yet that some men are incapable of caring for anyone but themselves." Silence fell over the room. Pippa looked stricken. Heloise's expression had softened into something that might have been respect. And Dacian was looking at her like she'd just confirmed something he'd suspected all along. "You have extraordinary courage," he said. "I hope you know that." "I have extraordinary desperation," Anwen corrected. "Courage would have been refusing him. Consequences be damned." "No." His voice was firm. "Courage is doing what must be done, even when you're afraid, even when it costs you everything. You did that at 17, to protect your family. You're doing it again now, by leaving." She didn't know what to say. No one had ever called her courageous before. "Now then," Heloise said briskly, breaking the waited moment. "We have practical matters to discuss. The annulment will take time, weeks at minimum, possibly months if Lord Hallworth contests it. During that time, you'll need to be above reproach. No private conversations with my nephew. No late-night wanderings. No appearance of impropriety whatsoever. I understand. You'll also need a wardrobe. That dress fits well, but you'll need more than one. I'll have Madame Fontaine come from the village tomorrow for measurements. I can't afford. I can. Dacian's voice brooked no argument. Consider it a loan against your future independence. You can repay me when Thornbrook is restored to your family. Anwen wanted to argue. She wanted to protest that she couldn't accept charity, couldn't be indebted to another man, and couldn't trade one form of ownership for another. But she was tired. So deeply, profoundly tired. Thank you, she said instead. There's one more thing. Heloise's voice had grown serious. You mentioned your brother in the carriage. Corwin, yes? Yes. I haven't seen him in 2 years. Aldrich intercepted all our correspondence. Dacian has sent word to him. He should arrive within the week. Anwen's heart stopped. Corwin is coming here? He was already planning to travel south when the letter reached him. Apparently, he's been preparing a legal challenge of his own, though without the resources to pursue it. Heloise's smile was sharp. Your brother has not been idle, Lady Hallworth. He's been building a case against your husband for months. He simply lacked the power to act on it. Tears burned behind Anwen's eyes. Corwin, her brother, who she'd thought had forgotten her, who she'd feared had moved on, started a new life, left her behind in her gilded prison. He'd been fighting for her all along. I'd like to be alone for a while, she managed, if you don't mind. Of course. Heloise rose, gesturing for Pippa to follow. Dinner is at 8. Someone will come to escort you. They filed out, leaving Anwen alone with Dacian. He hadn't moved from his position by the fireplace. You should go too, she said, not looking at him. Your aunt said, no private conversations. My aunt said many things. Not all of them were meant literally. He paused. Are you all right? I don't know. The honesty surprised her. I keep waiting for something terrible to happen. For you to reveal some hidden motive. For Aldrich to appear and drag me back. For all of this to turn out to be a dream I'll wake from. It's not a dream. He moved toward her, stopping a respectful distance away. And I have no hidden motives. Or rather, my motives are exactly what I've stated. I want to help you because I couldn't help my sister. I want to see justice done because injustice destroyed someone I loved. And when the annulment is final, when I'm free, what then? Then you live your life, however you choose, and I live mine, knowing I did one good thing to balance the scales. She studied his face, searching for deception, and finding none. Why does it matter so much to you? You didn't know your sister's husband personally. You've never met Aldrich before today. This crusade of yours seems excessive for guilt alone. Something shuddered in his expression. Perhaps we can discuss that another time, when you've had a chance to rest and settle in. He was hiding something. She could feel it, a weight beneath his words that spoke of secrets unshared. But she was too exhausted to press. Another time, she agreed. He nodded and moved toward the door, but he paused at the threshold, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't read. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm glad you're here, despite the circumstances, despite everything. Then he was gone, leaving Anwen alone with her tea and her thoughts, and the unsettling realization that she was glad too. She shouldn't be. She barely knew him. She had no reason to trust him beyond his word and his actions. But sitting in this warm room, in this beautiful house, surrounded by people who seemed genuinely determined to help her. For the first time in 2 years, she felt something other than despair. And that terrified her more than anything Aldrich had ever done. Because hope, she had learned, was the cruelest weapon of all. 2 weeks at Vexley Manor transformed Anwen in ways she hadn't anticipated. She slept through entire nights without startling awake at phantom footsteps. She ate meals without calculating whether her appetite would draw criticism. She walked through gardens without permission, read books without apology, laughed at Pippa's endless chatter without fearing reprisal. And she watched Dacian. She couldn't help it. He was everywhere, a constant presence that she'd grown to anticipate. Breakfast in the morning room, where he asked her opinions about the day's news. Afternoon walks through the grounds, always properly chaperoned by Heloise or Pippa. Evening conversations in the library, discussing poetry and philosophy and the small details of their very different lives. He never touched her beyond what courtesy required, never stood too close, never spoke too intimately, never gave anyone cause for gossip. But sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression that made her heart stutter. And sometimes she realized she was looking at him the same way. "You're falling in love with him," Heloise said one morning, without preamble, over embroidery in the sitting room. Anwen's needle slipped, pricking her finger. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't insult my intelligence, child. I've watched you these past 2 weeks. The way you brighten when he enters a room. The way you listen when he speaks. The way you avoid being alone with him because you don't trust yourself." Heat flooded Anwen's cheeks. "I'm still married. I shouldn't feel anything." "You're married to a monster who never touched you. The law may call it marriage. God certainly doesn't." Eloise set down her embroidery with a decisive motion. "My nephew is a good man, perhaps the best I've ever known. He's also guarded, grieving, and convinced he doesn't deserve happiness. You could be good for each other, if you were both brave enough to admit it. Even if that were true, it's impossible. I'm damaged goods, a discarded wife. No duke would. This duke would." Eloise's voice was firm. "I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Not even before Marguerite died, when he was young and idealistic and believed the world was kind. Marguerite, his sister's name." Anwen stored it away, another piece of the puzzle that was Dacian Ashworth. "The Whitmore Assembly is tomorrow evening," Heloise continued. "Local society, nothing too grand. But it will be your first public appearance since arriving here. People will talk. They always do. Should I not attend?" "You should absolutely attend. Hiding achieves nothing except confirming suspicion." Heloise's smile was sharp. "We'll dress you magnificently, present you as my special guest, and let the county see exactly what sort of woman Lord Hallworth was foolish enough to mistreat. By the end of the evening, every matron in attendance will be on your side." The confidence in her voice was almost enough to quiet the fear gnawing at Anwen's stomach. Almost. The Whitmore Assembly Hall blazed with candlelight, its modest dimensions packed with what appeared to be every respectable family within 20 miles. Anwen descended from the carriage in a gown of midnight blue velvet, her mother's sapphires at her throat, her dark hair swept up in an elaborate style that Pippa had spent an hour perfecting. She felt like a fraud. She felt like a queen. Dacian offered his arm with formal courtesy, but his eyes held warmth that the gesture couldn't conceal. "Ready?" "No." "You'll be magnificent anyway." They entered together, Heloise on Dacian's other arm, Pippa trailing behind with barely contained excitement. The conversation in the room stuttered, then stopped entirely as heads turned to assess the newcomers. Anwen felt the weight of every gaze: curiosity, speculation, judgment. "Smile," Heloise murmured. "They can smell fear." She smiled. It felt more like baring teeth. The first hour was a gauntlet of introductions. Lady Ashworth presented Anwen to one prominent family after another, each time emphasizing her connection to the Thornbrook estate, her mother's well-remembered reputation, her status as a dear family friend, visiting for the season. The lies came wrapped in truth, which made them easier to swallow. "Lady Hallworth," A familiar voice cut through the crowd, and Anwen's blood turned to ice. She turned to find Aldrich standing 10 feet away, immaculate in evening dress, his smile sharper than any blade. Beside him, resplendent in crimson silk, stood Oriana. "I heard you'd be attending," Aldrich continued, his voice pitched to Carrie. "I thought it only proper that I come see my wife." The room went silent. Anwen's hand tightened convulsively on Dacian's arm. She could feel his muscles coiling beneath her fingers, tension radiating from him like heat from a forge. "Lord Hallworth," Dacian's voice was ice. "I wasn't aware you'd been invited. Sir Whitmore and I are old friends. Unlike some, I don't need to steal other men's wives to find companionship." The accusation landed like a slap. Whispers erupted around them, fans fluttering, eyes widening. "Aldrich." Anwen surprised herself by speaking. "This is neither the time nor place." "When would be a better time, darling?" His endearment was poison. "You fled our home without warning. You've been living with another man for 2 weeks. I think I'm entitled to a public conversation with my own wife." "You're entitled to nothing." Dacian stepped forward, positioning himself between Anwen and her husband. "Your treatment of Lady Hallworth voided any rights you might claim." "My treatment?" Aldrich laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the rafters. "I gave her everything, a title, a home, a position in society. And how does she repay me? By running off with the first Duke who showed interest." "That's not," Anwen started. "Tell me, Vexley." Aldrich's voice dropped to something dangerous. "How does it feel, bedding another man's wife? Does the forbidden nature add excitement, or is she as cold with you as she was with me?" The crack of Dacian's fist connecting with Aldrich's jaw echoed through the suddenly silent room. Aldrich staggered backward, catching himself against a pillar. Blood trickled from his split lip. For one frozen moment, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Women gasped, men shouted. Oriana shrieked dramatically. And through it all, Aldrich smiled with his bloody mouth, triumph gleaming in his eyes. He'd wanted this. He'd planned this. He'd come here specifically to provoke exactly this reaction. And Dacian had given it to him. "Guards," Sir Whitmore was pushing through the crowd. "Separate them immediately." "No need." Aldrich straightened his cravat with exaggerated calm. "I've made my point. The Duke of Vexley has assaulted a peer of the realm in defense of a woman who is legally still my wife. I imagine the courts will find that interesting." He turned on his heel and strode from the room, Oriana scurrying after him. But at the doorway, he paused, looking back directly at Anwen. "This isn't over," he said softly. "You belong to me. You always will." Then he was gone. Anwen stood frozen, aware of the whispers rising around her like floodwater, aware of Heloise's grim expression, aware of Dacian's ragged breathing beside her. Everything had just become infinitely more complicated. The carriage ride home was silent. Anwen sat pressed into the corner, as far from Dacian as the small space would allow. Heloise and Pippa had taken the second carriage, giving them a privacy that felt dangerous. I shouldn't have hit him. Dacian's voice broke the quiet. I played directly into his hands. Yes. He'll use this against us. Against you. I know. I'm sorry. The words sounded torn from him. I heard him speak about you that way. And I couldn't. You couldn't control yourself. Anwen finally looked at him. Which is exactly what he was counting on. Dacian's hands were clenched in his lap, knuckles white. In the passing lamplight, she could see the anguish on his face. I've made everything worse, he said. Your annulment, your reputation, everything I promised to protect. Yes. She said it without gentleness. He needed honesty, not comfort. You have. Tell me how to fix it. I don't know if you can. The carriage swayed as they turned onto the long drive leading to Vexley Manor. Neither of them spoke again until they'd arrived, until the servants had retreated, until they stood alone in the entrance hall, with the weight of the evening's disaster pressing down on them. "I need to explain something," Dacian said. "Something I should have told you before." "Now? After everything that just happened?" "Because of everything that just happened." He moved toward the library, clearly expecting her to follow. "Please, it's important." She followed, because what else could she do? The library was dark except for the banked fire, casting long shadows across the book-lined walls. Dacian didn't light any candles. Perhaps he found the darkness easier. "My sister Marguerite married at 17, he began, his back to her, staring into the dying flames. "Like you. Her husband was charming, wealthy, and well-connected. Everything my parents wanted. They ignored the rumors about his temper, his gambling, his cruelty to servants and horses." Anwen sank into a chair, listening. The first year, she wrote letters full of hope. She was learning to manage a household, she said. Her husband was demanding, but she would win him over. The second year, the letters became less frequent, more strained. She mentioned headaches, exhaustion, difficulty sleeping. His voice roughened. The third year, she wrote one letter, just one, begging me to help her, describing bruises she couldn't hide, isolation she couldn't escape, fear that had become her constant companion. She asked me to come, to take her away, and to do something. "What did you do?" "Nothing." The word fell like a stone. "I was 22. I was at Oxford, busy with my studies, and my friends, and my glittering future. I wrote back that she should try harder, pray more, and be a better wife. I told her that marriage was sacred, and she had made a commitment." Anwen's chest ached. 6 weeks later, she was dead. Her husband claimed a riding accident, but her maid found me at the funeral and told me the truth. He'd beaten her so badly she couldn't walk without pain. She'd mounted her horse anyway, ridden to the cliffs, and... He stopped. She chose to fall, because I gave her no other option. Dacian. I destroyed him afterward. His voice was cold now, clinical. Her husband. I spent 3 years systematically dismantling everything he'd built. His fortune, his reputation, his standing. By the time I was finished, he had nothing. He died in a debtor's prison 5 years ago, alone and forgotten. He finally turned to face her, and in the firelight, his expression was haunted. "When I hit Aldrich tonight, I wasn't protecting you. I was destroying myself. I was that same, helpless 22-year-old, watching a woman be humiliated and degraded. And this time, I could do something. So I did the wrong thing. The stupid thing. The thing that felt good instead of the thing that would actually help." Anwen rose from her chair. She crossed the room slowly, stopping an arm's length from him. "You're not the same person you were at 22, she said. "Aren't I? I still made the wrong choice. I still let my emotions control me. I still... You came for me." Her voice was fierce. "When my brother wrote, you didn't ignore the letter. You didn't tell yourself it wasn't your problem. You spent 6 months researching my situation. You traveled to my home, confronted my husband, and offered me an escape. That's not nothing, Dacian. That's everything." He stared at her, as if she'd said something incomprehensible. "I've been alone for 2 years," she continued, "trapped in a marriage that was designed to break me. No one came. No one tried. Not until you." She reached up, her fingers brushing his jaw, where tension had carved lines of pain. "You made mistakes tonight. You'll probably make more. But you're here. You're fighting for me. And that matters more than one punch thrown in anger." His breath shuddered out of him. "Anwen, don't." She pulled her hand back, suddenly aware of how close they were, how dark the room was, how fast her heart was beating. "Don't say anything you can't take back. I'm still married. You're still my protector. There are lines we can't cross." "And if I want to cross them?" The question hung between them, charged with possibility. Then you wait. Her voice was barely a whisper. Until I'm free. Until the annulment is final. Until we're both certain this is real, and not just gratitude and guilt tangled together. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I'll wait," he said, "however long it takes." She should have left then, should have retreated to her room, put proper distance between them, and remembered all the reasons why this was dangerous. Instead, she rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Just his cheek, innocent almost. But the sound he made, low and pained, was anything but innocent. "Good night, Dacian," she whispered, and fled before she could change her mind. Corwin arrived 3 days after the assembly, on a gray morning that threatened rain. Anwen stood on the front steps, watching the hired carriage approach, with a heart that felt too large for her chest. 2 years. 2 years since she'd seen her brother, since she'd hugged him goodbye on her wedding day, since she'd watched him disappear into a future she couldn't follow. The carriage stopped. The door opened. And there he was. He was taller than she remembered, broader through the shoulders. His hair was the same dark brown as hers, his eyes the same uncertain gray. But there were new lines around his mouth, new shadows beneath his eyes. The years had not been kind to him either. "Anwen." Her name and his voice broke something loose inside her. She was running before she made a conscious decision, flying down the steps and into his arms, sobbing against his shoulder, while he held her so tightly she couldn't breathe. "I tried," he said, his voice cracking. "I wrote every week. I came to the house 3 times. They always turned me away. They said you didn't want to see me. I knew it was a lie, but I couldn't prove it. I couldn't. I know." She pulled back, gripping his arms, drinking in his face. "I know now. Dacian told me. It's not your fault. I should have done more. I should have found a way. You found a way now." She smiled through her tears. "You wrote to a duke. That's rather impressive, actually." He laughed, watery and raw. "I wrote to everyone. The duke was the only one who listened." Over Corwin's shoulder, Anwen saw Dacian emerge from the house. He hung back, giving them space, but his presence was unmistakable. "You must be Lord Corwin." Dacian descended the steps with measured pace. "Your sister has spoken of you often." "Your Grace." Corwin straightened, his arms still around Anwen's shoulders. "I can't begin to express my gratitude. What you've done for my family. What I've done isn't finished yet." Dacian's expression was serious. "Come inside. We have much to discuss." The study became their war room. Documents spread across every surface, timelines mapped on paper. Strategy debated for hours while the rain finally broke outside. "The assembly incident complicates things," Dacian admitted. "Aldrich's solicitor has already filed a complaint. He's claiming I've stolen his wife and assaulted him when he tried to retrieve her." "That's absurd," Corwin said. "Anwen came willingly. The assault was provoked." "Courts don't always care about nuance. We need to move faster on the annulment. If we can prove the marriage was never consummated, the rest becomes irrelevant." "Can you prove it?" Corwin asked, looking between them. Anwen felt her cheeks heat. "There are physical examinations. That would confirm it." "Unpleasant," Heloise said from her position by the window. She'd joined them an hour ago, contributing sharp observations and sharper judgments. "But effective. A physician's testimony would settle the matter entirely." "I'll do it." Anwen kept her voice steady. "Whatever's necessary. There may be another way." Dacian pulled a letter from the pile of documents. "This arrived this morning, from Mrs. Dalton, your former cook." Anwen took the letter with trembling hands. She scanned the contents, her eyes widening. "She kept records," she breathed, "of everything. Aldrich's late nights, his absences, and the separate bedrooms from the wedding night onward. She even documented the servants' gossip about his preferences." Preferences? Corwin asked. Oriana wasn't his first mistress. Anwen's voice was flat. She was simply the most public. According to Mrs. Dalton, he's maintained companions throughout our marriage, women he actually wanted, unlike the burden of a wife forced upon him for financial gain. This is excellent. Eloise's voice was crisp. Multiple witnesses to his infidelity, documented evidence of separate sleeping arrangements. Combined with the physician's testimony, we have an overwhelming case. There's more. Dacian's expression was grim. The financial records from Thornbrook. My solicitor has been investigating. Aldrich has been systematically stripping the estate, selling off assets, pocketing the proceeds. The original inheritance your father left would have been substantial. What remains is barely enough to support a modest household. Corwin's face darkened. He stole from us. He stole from your sister. As her husband, he had legal authority over her property. But there may be recourse, especially if we can prove fraud in the original marriage negotiations. The conversation continued, strategy layered upon strategy. That night, alone with Dacian in the library. Your brother is impressive, Dacian said. He's always been stubborn. The fire crackled between them. Anwen, when this is over... A crash from somewhere deep in the house cut him off, then shouting, then screams. They ran. They found the source in the kitchen. Mrs. Pemberton stood backed against the wall. 2 men held her arms, and in the center stood Aldrich. There you are. His voice was pleasant. I was beginning to think you'd fled again. How did you get in here? Dacian's voice was deadly. Through the servant's entrance. Aldrich's gaze moved to Anwen. Hello, wife. Let Mrs. Pemberton go. He gestured, and 1 man released the housekeeper. Go. Tell anyone who asks that Lord Holworth has come to retrieve what belongs to him. Mrs. Pemberton fled. You've made a mistake coming here. Dacian stepped forward, placing himself between Aldrich and Anwen. My staff will have summoned the magistrate by now. Your staff will do nothing. I have 6 men stationed around the property. Anyone who tries to leave will be stopped. Aldrich's smile widened. I didn't come to negotiate, Vexley. I came to take back what's mine. I'm not yours. Anwen's voice rang clear. I was never yours. I was a transaction, remember? An obligation you endured for financial gain. Semantics. Aldrich's pleasant mask slipped, revealing something ugly beneath. You're my wife. The law says you belong to me, and no jumped-up duke with a hero complex is going to change that. The annulment will never be granted. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. This arrived from my solicitor today. Your petition has been denied. The court found insufficient grounds. Anwen's blood turned to ice. That's impossible, Dacian said. We have witnesses, documentation. You have the word of servants and a spurned wife. I have the word of a peer of the realm. Aldrich tucked the paper away. The law favors men of property, Vexley. Surely you know that. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Aldrich gestured to his men. Take her. They moved fast. Too fast for Anwen to react. Rough hands grabbed her arms, pulling her away from Dacian. She screamed, struggling, but they were too strong. Let her go. Dacian lunged forward, but Aldrich produced a pistol from his coat, leveling it at Anwen's head. One more step, he said calmly, and I'll claim she was shot trying to escape with her lover. Tragic, really. A wife driven to madness by an illicit affair. Dacian froze. Better. Aldrich's smile returned. Now, here's what's going to happen. My wife is coming home with me. You're going to stay here and contemplate the consequences of interfering in another man's marriage. And if you ever contact her again, I'll make sure she suffers for it. Dacian, Anwen's voice cracked. Don't let him. Quiet. Aldrich's hand cracked across her face. Pain exploded through her cheek, stars bursting behind her eyes. The sound Dacian made was barely human. I'll kill you, he said, his voice shaking with rage. "If you touch her again, I will kill you." "You'll try." Aldrich was already moving toward the door, his men dragging Anwen with them. "But you won't succeed. You didn't save your sister, remember? You won't save her, either." The words landed like physical blows. Anwen saw Dacian flinch, saw the devastation in his eyes. Then she was pulled through the door, into the night, away from everything. The last thing she heard was Dacian screaming her name. The next hours were a nightmare. Anwen was thrown into a carriage, wrists bound, gagged when she tried to scream. "You brought this on yourself," Aldrich said as the carriage lurched into motion. "You can't be saved, Anwen. You're mine until one of us dies. We're going to London, to a house where no one will think to look for you." The carriage rattled through darkness, carrying her toward a future she couldn't imagine surviving. 3 days in a locked room in a London townhouse, with only a silent servant bringing meals she couldn't eat, and water she forced herself to drink. 3 days of Aldrich's visits, his gloating, and his detailed descriptions of how thoroughly he'd destroyed her hopes. The annulment denied. Dacian's reputation ruined by accusations of adultery and assault. Her brother arrested on trumped-up charges of conspiracy. "He'll be released eventually," Aldrich had said, almost kindly. "Once he agrees to sign over any claim to Thornbrook. Your family is nothing, Anwen. You should have accepted that from the beginning." She'd stopped responding, stopped reacting, stopped giving him the satisfaction of her pain. On the 4th morning, something changed. The servant who brought her breakfast was different. Younger, dark-haired, familiar. "Pippa." Anwen's voice was rusty from disuse. "Shh." The girl pressed a finger to her lips, glancing toward the door. "We don't have much time. Dacian is here. He's been searching for you since you were taken." Hope blazed through Anwen's chest, painful in its intensity. "How?" "Mrs. Dalton. She followed Aldrich's carriage to London, tracked it to this house. She sent word to Vexley Manor." Pippa was working at the rope, binding Anwen's wrists, her fingers quick and practiced. "There's a back entrance. Dacian's men are dealing with Aldrich's guards. We have maybe 10 minutes before someone notices you're gone. Aldrich is being arrested as we speak." Pippa's smile was fierce. The annulment denial, it was forged. Aldrich bribed a clerk to produce false documents. The real ruling came through yesterday. Your marriage is dissolved. The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. "What?" "You're free, Anwen." Pippa pulled the last rope loose. "Legally, officially free. Now can we please get out of here before something goes wrong?" They crept through servants' passages, down a narrow staircase, through a door that opened onto an alley. And there, waiting in the shadows with a carriage and 4 armed men, stood Dacian. He looked terrible. Unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing clothes that hadn't been changed in days. But when he saw her, his face transformed with such raw relief that Anwen's heart cracked open. "Anwen." He caught her as she stumbled toward him, gathering her into his arms with desperate strength. "Thank God. Thank God." She buried her face against his chest, breathing him in. Cedar and sandalwood and safety. "Home. I thought I'd lost you," he whispered into her hair. "When they took you, when I couldn't stop them, I thought, I know." She pulled back to look at him, framing his face with her freed hands. "I know. But you found me. You came." "I'll always come," his voice broke. "Always. No matter what. The annulment is real. The original ruling was in our favor. Aldrich forged the rejection, but his clerk confessed when he was arrested. You're free, Anwen. Truly free." The tears she'd been holding back finally fell. She stood in a London alley, in the arms of a duke who'd torn apart the city to find her, and she wept with the release of years of pain. "We need to go," Pippa said gently, "before Aldrich's supporters realize what's happening." They climbed into the carriage. Anwen tucked against Dacian's side, his arm around her shoulders, as if he'd never let go again. The vehicle lurched into motion, carrying them away from her prison toward a future she could finally imagine. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we finish this." Dacian's voice was grim. "Aldrich will face charges for forgery, assault, kidnapping, and fraud. The evidence against him is overwhelming. He'll be lucky to avoid prison. And Thornbrook? Already being transferred to your brother. The original deed, the reversion clause, it all holds. Your family's estate will be restored." Anwen closed her eyes, overwhelmed. Everything she'd lost was being returned. Everything she'd feared had been defeated. "There's one more thing." Dacian's voice changed, becoming softer, uncertain. "Something I need to ask you, but it can wait until you've rested, until you've recovered. Ask me now." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "Whatever it is, I want to hear it now." He took her hands in his grip gentle, almost reverent. "I know you've been through an ordeal. I know the last thing you want is another man making claims on your life. But Anwen," he drew a shaky breath, "I love you. I've loved you since the night you negotiated terms with me in my carriage, refusing to be a passive victim, demanding respect and agency. I've loved you through every conversation, every shared meal, and every moment I forced myself to keep proper distance when all I wanted was to hold you." She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. Not until you've had time to discover who you are without a husband controlling your every move. But I'm asking you to let me court you. Properly. Openly. To let me prove that not all marriages are prisons, that love doesn't have to mean loss of self." His eyes searched hers. "Will you give me that chance?" The carriage swayed. London streamed past the windows, and Anwen felt the last frozen pieces of her heart finally thaw. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. I'll give you that chance." His smile was like sunrise after endless winter. 6 months later, Anwen stood in the gardens of Thornbrook, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The estate had been transformed beyond recognition. Repairs completed on the manor house, gardens restored to their former glory. Tenants returned to their cottages with debts forgiven and rents reduced. The stream where she'd played as a child ran clear and bright again, no longer choked with neglect. Corwin managed everything with the fierce determination that had once built dams across streams, and Anwen helped where she could, learning the business of land management that should have been her birthright. But she didn't live at Thornbrook, not permanently. She lived at Vexley Manor as Lady Heloise's official companion, as Pippa's beloved friend, as the woman the Duke of Vexley courted with patient, unwavering devotion. 6 months of walks through gardens, of dinners, where he asked her opinions on everything from poetry to politics, of conversations that stretched into the small hours of the morning. 6 months of falling deeper in love with a man who had risked everything to save her. "You're thinking too hard." Dacian's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. "I can hear it from here." She turned to find him walking toward her through the rose bushes, 2 glasses of wine in his hands, the last light of day catching the gold flecks in his amber eyes. "I'm thinking about how much has changed," she said, accepting the glass he offered. "A year ago I was trapped in a marriage I thought would last forever. Now I'm standing in my family's garden, free and whole and happy." She smiled at him. "Doesn't feel real sometimes." "It's real." He clinked his glass against hers. "Shall I prove it? How would you do that?" Instead of answering, he set down his wine and reached into his coat pocket. When his hand emerged, it held a small velvet box. Anwen's heart stopped. "I know I said I'd wait," Dacian said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I promised not to rush you, but it's been 6 months, Anwen. 6 months of dinners and walks and conversations that I never want to end. 6 months of watching you bloom into the woman you were always meant to be. 6 months of loving you more each day and trying to find the right words to ask you. Yes, he blinked. I haven't asked yet. I don't need you to ask. I know what you're going to say, and the answer is yes. She set down her own wine and stepped closer, cupping his face in her hands. I love you, Dacian Ashworth. I've loved you since you stood in my drawing room and saw me instead of looking through me. I've loved you through your guilt and your grief and your stubborn determination to save everyone but yourself. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. I want to fall asleep beside you every night and wake up in your arms every morning. Yes. The box fell from his fingers as he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion they'd held back for so long. She melted into him, tasting wine and joy and forever. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, he retrieved the box from the grass and opened it properly. The ring inside was exquisite, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, old and elegant, and clearly a family piece. It was my mother's, he said. She would have loved you. I wish I could have known her. You'd have gotten along terrifyingly well. She had spine, too. Anwen laughed as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant for her. We should tell the others, she said. In a moment. He pulled her close again, resting his forehead against hers. Right now, I just want to hold you. My future wife. My partner. My love. They stood together as the sun finished its descent, painting the gardens in shades of gold. Behind them, the lights of Thornbrook glowed warm and welcoming. Ahead of them, a future full of possibility stretched toward the horizon. Thank you, Anwen whispered. For what? For coming for me. For fighting for me. For believing I was worth saving when I'd stopped believing it myself. You saved yourself, he said fiercely. I just opened the door. You walked through it. You chose freedom. You chose to trust again. You chose to love again, despite everything. Perhaps that was true. Perhaps it was both of them, together, finding their way out of grief and fear into something new and beautiful. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was this moment, this man, this beginning. 1 year later, the Duke and Duchess of Vexley's first anniversary was celebrated with a gathering at Vexley Manor. Just family, Dacian had insisted, though the guest list had somehow expanded to include half the county. Anwen suspected Heloise's involvement in the escalation, but she couldn't bring herself to mind. She'd grown to love the chaos of a full house, the sound of laughter echoing through halls that had once been silent with grief. The manor that had sheltered her when she had nowhere else to go now rang with music and conversation and joy. Corwin was there with his new bride, a sensible woman named Harriet, who shared his passion for estate management and had already transformed Thornbrook's accounting practices. Heloise held court in the drawing room, dispensing wisdom and pointed observations in equal measure to anyone who dared approach. Pippa had developed a suspicious closeness with a young viscount that would require close supervision. And Mrs. Dalton, now officially the head cook of Vexley Manor, produced a feast that had everyone groaning with satisfaction and begging for her recipes. Happy? Dacian murmured, finding Anwen by the tall window as the party continued around them. Deliriously. She leaned into his side. Though I should tell you something. That sounds ominous. Not ominous. Just life-changing. She took his hand and pressed it to her stomach. In about 7 months, this family is going to get larger. She watched, understanding dawn in his eyes. The shock, the wonder, the overwhelming joy. You're... He couldn't finish the sentence. I am. We're going to. We are. He kissed her then, right there in front of everyone, scandalizing the older guests and delighting the younger ones. "I love you," he said when they finally parted. "I love you, and our child, and this life we're building. I love all of it." "I know." She smiled, radiant with happiness and hope. "I love you too." Across the room, Heloise caught Anwen's eye and raised her glass in a silent toast. To new beginnings, to family, to love that was worth fighting for. Anwen raised her own glass in return. A year ago, she'd been a prisoner in her own home, married to a monster, stripped of hope. Now she was a duchess, a wife, soon to be a mother. She was loved, respected, free. And it had all started with a duke who looked at her and saw not what she was, but what she could truly become. Some stories ended with escape. Theirs was only beginning, and Anwen couldn't wait to see where it would lead them.